Sure. And I think, here, both of us are sort of, trying to be, sort of curious and open to these new things and appreciating there are nuance in things, like we're understanding that. And it can still be
Sure.
hard, right? So now imagine folks that have a more black and white picture of the world and really get uncomfortable. So as uncomfortable as we are with nuance, which is the reality of the world, everything's, got some degree of nuance to it, usually
Yeah.
more than we think. So now imagine a person that kind of has a more black and white view and has more difficulty with that. Now they're going to be even more comfortable with that nuance, and that's one thing that can be a challenge for sure. And and there's, you're kind of talking about these arguments and people that sort of assume they're always thinking rationally, or that's all the conclusions they've ever come to have been purely based on the facts, right? Um,
Right.
and that, as you were saying before, it's simply not true. And I noticed this particularly, I think, with sort of math folks and sometimes computer science folks and folks that consider themselves, just really rational. I don't use emotions in my thoughts, and that's like, you're just not realizing how much you're using emotions in your process. You think
Totally.
it's all rational, but we're doing that. We're all doing it, even if we think we're not. And and a big piece of this is there's another phenomenon you may be aware of called, like, naive realism. And
No.
this is this idea that given these facts, I've come to this conclusion. Therefore, anyone that you gave the same facts would come to the same conclusion. And we're just missing out on two big factors there. One is my
Right.
interpretation of those facts, and the other is my motivation, as we've been talking about a lot, for even analyzing and looking at those facts. So, I mean, a good
Right.
example of that is, let's say somebody leaves a flyer on your car about flat Earth, and it's got all these bullet points. This is maybe a little bit like your 9/11 truther thing, right? It's got all these bullet points that sound, and let's say all those bullet points have a grain of truth, or maybe some of these points are actually even true. Is that going to change your mind and you'll go, wow, the earth is flat? No, because that flyer has no idea, about your context, about, your how you're going to interpret those facts and your
Hmm.
worldview, and ultimately your motivation. So, this is where people get it wrong. Like, this is the main another topic I get, a lot of feedback about. People say, well, I gave them the facts and they didn't change their mind. It's like, yeah, well, A, that's not the way anybody changes their mind, and B,
Yeah.
they interpret those same facts differently. And sometimes they just don't trust the facts. I mean, that's a whole different topic, about what facts, and
Yeah.
that's all part of it too,
I think
right?
that's where we are now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, people talk about that we're in a post-truth world. I think we're much more in a post-trust world.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Because people they want to find truth, but you're only gonna really take it from who you trust. And so some people trust the institute that is, scientific endeavor, the process in which we will continue to evolve as we're make breaking new ground on every different, you know, part of our lives that science can be involved. But if you don't trust that at all, well, then you're dismissing that entire apparatus that for centuries we've used to divine truth. And so then you're only going to go to people that you trust. It could be a YouTube personality or a presidential candidate, either side of the aisle. And yeah, I think you're completely right on that. This isn't post truth. This is post trust, because it's so hard for people to trust anybody for what their news they're getting. And I would argue the people that are least likely to trust institutions and people, I think they're more emotionally activated, because I think they're really hurt, and they only want to trust people that make them feel good in whatever way. And from a human to human basis, I don't know. It's hard for me to not have complete empathy for that, because
Right.
they just want to back someone who thinks they have their back. And I don't know. I think we all can relate to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a reckoning about that. That I think that country is going to have to go through. Like, you just can't write off half the country as being dumb or racist or whatever. Like, there's more to it than that. Like you're saying, that it goes a little deeper. And
Yeah.
something else you were talking about before plays in here too, right? I mean, this problem of trust. You talked about how we can only, our level can only go so much. We can only be, enough ability to reason for ourselves or understand for ourselves those things that we can understand enough and build the knowledge base around. And here we've got things that have had centuries of knowledge base built. There's, like you say, you pick one topic, you're not going to be able to go that deep, even if that's your main topic. And now you
Yeah.
take the breadth of that, and you've got all these topics we can't go deep on. So, and that becomes a problem here, that if you're going to only rely on myself, I mean, I'm not going to be able to know very much um,
Right.
about the world. And this is where, so this is where it gets complicated, that as these things get more nuanced, and also this idea of certainty, right? Like, one of the challenges of all of this is that, certainty is where you get in trouble, right? When you actually believe a thing. Certainty is is what enables you to um, take on,
Live your life.
violence or something like that, right? Because I'm so
Oh,
certain
okay.
I'm right. I'm so certain I'm right that, well, I can just write off anything you say because I'm so certain I'm right. That's one problem. It just blocks any new knowledge coming in. But it also enables. That's what makes some of these bad behaviors possible, because I can justify it because I'm so certain. So
Right.
getting that comfortable with that nuance, that like in science, I was thinking about it from the science perspective, where certainties, there's a scale, right? It's kind of what it is, a confidence scale, right? So, we know
Hmm.
things with a certain amount of confidence, and that never goes to 1.0, right? Whatever, from a scale of 0 to 1, you're never at 1.0, no matter how much, the data is there, and how many, examples there are. It's just a confidence scale, like, evolution or something, right? And there's a lot of evidence that evolution is a thing, but there's probably going to be lots of things we discover about evolution that we don't know now. It's not going to mean like
Sure.
evolution isn't a thing, but we're going to know more about it in the future than we know now, and we're probably going to find out some things that, oh, that was kind of a wrong track. Like we with the way we divided species here was not quite right, and there's already a lot of debates like that going around. And even species are a perfect
Right.
example of this, where it's like, oh yeah, well, this species used to go there, now it goes there, and then people go, well, look, science got it wrong, and now they're, so why do we trust them now, right?
Right.
And it's
Well,
it's getting.
Darwin was totally wrong about emotions. Like he wrote a second book about emotions, and he followed his child around, and the things he said, that emotions, I think, was like, were generally useless. He was totally wrong about that. Like he couldn't have been more wrong about that. But he was spot on, at least from what we see now, for how the evolution of the species work. But he just discounted this idea of emotion, and some theorize it's because, where he came from. I believe he was he British?
Yeah, I
Is
think
that
so.
right? Yeah, and so, like, in the Victorian era, there was this very stiff upper lip, that emotions were just for women and children, and they were very silly. And if you showed your emotions, you were emotionally incontinent. They said so. Like, there's a big cultural bias that he had for that entire book that has now been disproven. And so, to your point, like, we're gonna get to points where even things where, from brilliant people who were accurate about one thing, completely shit the bed on the next thing that they did.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you see that in the news media as another example of that, right? Just because, somebody an author or a journalist got this thing really right doesn't mean the next thing is going to necessarily be that right. They still could get something wrong in the future. So that's a
Right.
heavy lift for us to deal with too, and that feeds back that trust, because that person or that journalist or that team got something wrong, then everything's going to be wrong. Well, it works the other way too. Like, just because they got that thing wrong, or they went in a bad direction there, doesn't mean everything they
Right.
do prospectively is bad. And that's a real heavy lift for us to wade through.